On the thin line between death and life, surrounded by all that fear imagery from S. Not's ability, doesn't it make you question what that fear really says about Rukia? About the part of her heart that fear can't reach? But what causes fear to be born? Isn't it from the tiny insecurities of the heart? And that insecurity didn't start with Rukia. It started with Byakuya, the moment he was torn apart by it. Fear with a cause is easy to overcome, but true fear has no cause. And isn't this the moment that makes you realize why an experienced captain like Byakuya was shaken by the fear? Battle after battle, he became a captain who defeated enemies by overpowering them, allowing him to overcome fear through will and experience. Every time he survived a life or death situation. But the moment S. Nodt stripped him of his Bankai, that long-forgotten sensation began to seep in, leaving him, for the first time, powerless and vulnerable in battle, against the very power that once shielded him from death, making him crumble before true fear, an instinct that simply cannot be escaped, leaving him with a completely powerless Shikai against his Bankai. He could only use his blade to push Renji away from the danger as a last desperate defense. But his inability to protect wasn't just a loss in this battle, it became a lasting shame. A shame that meant dying as the captain who led his own officers to their deaths. Let the enemy trample Seirei and left their families in grief. Because in the end all living things live by avoiding fear. Yet, what happens to the fear when it faces someone who is no longer in a living state? By lowering her body temperature to absolute zero, molecular motion ceases, making Rukia functionally dead, preventing the fear from seeping in through her skin and forcing its way to take root through the only possible path, the optic nerve. The harder she closes her eyes, the fear channels her memories through her optic nerves, transmitting the insecurities eating at her heart directly into her brain, and causing the evil memories to resonate deeper with no way to cut it off. As her deepest fears start to surface, 3 known faces appear. Yet doesn't that make you question what more her heart could be hinting at? But once you look at the panels that Kubo inserted of Ichigo, Byakuya, and Orihime, you will notice they weren't random, but they are functioning as a mirror reflecting how she sees herself through them. If you think about it, Rukia witnessed Ichigo's lowest moments, from his fear of his inner hollow to the despair of losing his powers. Those panels that Kubo chose to highlight the part in the manga where Ichigo felt self-blame and despair over his inability to protect. And it was Rukia, the one who brought him back and restored his power to protect once again. A lens into a trauma from her past, the time when she was left with no choice but to kill the mentor she admired, because of her inability to protect the very same mentor. Kaien, whom Ichigo resemble. But is it just Ichigo, or is this reflected in Orihime as well? When Urahara dismissed her from the battlefield, she was left feeling like a hindrance, despite her desperate desire to fight alongside her friends. It was Rukia who reminded Orihime that she wasn't a burden, but part of the reason Rukia herself was still alive. And doesn't this empathy stems from an experience that Rukia understands very well? Rukia lived to see her friends risk their lives to rescue her, as this became a shared trauma that Orihime later had to endure. Both felt their own helplessness and the feeling of being a burden. Yet this fear of being a burden is rooted in a deeper insecurity, a lack of self-worth, one that started decades earlier with her brother and her adoption into his clan. As far back as Rukia's enlistment ceremony, Byakuya had already broken the great noble family's laws twice, by marrying Hisana and later adopting her sister Rukia. By then, he was living with both his promise to protect Rukia and the oath he had made at his parents' graves not to break those laws again. When he asked Rukia what seat she was assigned, she apologized that her abilities hadn't earned her a seat. She misinterpreted his brief, distant reaction and the way he ended the conversation as disappointment. In Rukia's mind, because those expectations were tied to the Kuchiki name, it left her believing she was inadequate in her abilities and wasn't meeting what he expected of her, which made her feel unworthy of being a Kuchiki clan member. Her lack of a seated position wasn't due to a lack of skills. Rukia had the skills to become a seated officer. It was because Byakuya had pulled strings to have her removed as a seated officer candidate. He was upholding the promise he made to Hisana to protect Rukia by ensuring she wasn't exposed to the danger of a seated rank. So when Rukia was convicted and sentenced to death for the crime of transferring her Shinigami power to Ichigo, Byakuya was torn between his two promises, even as he chose to uphold the oath to his parents. It was only after her rescue that he revealed the truth, allowing Rukia to finally understand the heavy burden behind his decisions. But it was the 1,000-year blood war arc where their relationship truly came full circle. When he praised Rukia for having become strong and stepped back, letting her be the one to finish As Nodt, the insecurities born from her fear of being weak and her self-doubt were resolved. Because what Rukia had been waiting for from Byakuya was recognition of her strength. And when you think about As Nodt's philosophy about fear, how all relief is tied to life and all fear is tied to death, doesn't it hint at Rukia's object of relief? When Rukia faced her death, she questioned whether she was worthy to have bloodshed for her, and accepted her inevitable end because she was still carrying the guilt of Kaien's death and the shame of believing she acted for herself. By convincing herself she had no regrets and no reason left to live, she tried to turn her inevitable death into peace, not fear. But that facade soon shatters when Gin taunts her with the possibility that Renji will die. Because she fears for Renji and the others risking their lives to save her, her fear of her own death resurfaces. Gin knew exactly what would shatter her resolve emotionally. By saying Renji's name and offering to free her and to save him and the others, Jin gave her a thread of hope that they might all survive, only to twist it into a reminder of her powerlessness and the fear of her own approaching death. And doesn't this make you wonder why Renji wasn't part of Rukia's fear? If you look closely at As Nodt's philosophy, it seems to imply that Renji acts as a mirror to Rukia's self-worth. Despite the years they drifted apart and the gap of their social status, he threw away his rank in an act of rebellion, risking his life to save her. The reason why Renji didn't appear in her fears could be that his actions made Rukia realize her life had value to someone, that she was worth risking a life for and worthy to be loved. By giving her a reason to live, Renji became the object of relief in her heart. He is her just because, and the one tied to life. Thank you for watching. Do you think stories ever truly end? Or do they always leave us searching? One story at a time, one sip at a time, until next time.